Don't let anything leave you in a state of perpetual worry. See, Paul is saying when you find yourself filled with anxiety, the action that is going to move you forward and keep you from getting stuck there is prayer. Max Lucado, in his book, Anxious for Nothing, he says this about anxiety. He says, the presence of anxiety is unavoidable, but the prison of anxiety is optional. So why prayer? Why would prayer be the key? Why is it prayer that is going to move us forward when we start to spiral down into worry or anxiety? Well, prayer is more than just words, right? It's more than just words that we're saying. Prayer is the action that brings us into the community of a Heavenly Father who loves and cares about us and desires the best for us. 1 Peter 5:7 says, cast all your anxiety, all your cares upon Him, upon God, for He cares for you. This word cast, it's like you're wearing this heavy coat and you're just throwing it off. You're throwing off this mantle, this weight of worry, and giving it to God. And then verse 5, because I don't think you can look at 6-7 without looking at verse 5 in Philippians 4. It gives some additional insights into what Paul is thinking and why he's saying we can, that we don't have to worry or that we can be anxious for nothing. And he says this, remember, verse 5, the Lord is near. And sometimes we forget this, but we need to remember that we are not alone. And so maybe we paraphrase this up to this point. Remember, the Lord is near. So don't get stuck in a perpetual state of worry. Instead, go to God and talk to Him about what you need. So why is it important to remember that the Lord is near in a high state of anxiety? Because one of the first lies of the enemy that will keep us in the prison of worry is the lie that we are alone and that God has abandoned us and that He doesn't care. One of my favorite stories is found in 1 Kings. It's chapters 18 and 19. And this is a great story. It's a really long story, so we don't have time to go into it all here. But I encourage you, if you have time, pick up your Bible, read, or your phone and read 1 Kings 18 and 19. You won't regret it. Great story. But I'm just going to kind of smoosh it down into just a little section today. In chapter 19, we find the prophet Elijah. He's running for his life. He's had this huge throwdown with the prophets of Baal. And spoiler alert, God wins. But it puts Elijah in danger for his life. And so he's running for his life. He's physically, emotionally, everything exhausted. And 1 Kings 19:3 says that he finally gets to some place where there's some shade. He sits under it, and he's so overwhelmed that he prays to die. And he says this, I have had enough, Lord. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. 1 Kings 19:5. Elijah is at the end of his rope. And by the way, you'll hear some people tell you that it says in the Bible that God won't give us more than we can handle. Just a clue, it doesn't say that. So, it doesn't say that. Just so you know. The Bible is full of stories over and over of people who are overwhelmed by the circumstances of life if they're trying to face it on their own. But what I wanted to focus on here is not so much Elijah, but God's response to Elijah. See, God doesn't scold him or ask him about his faith. God treats him with great compassion. He sends an angel to provide food and nourishment and rest until Elijah can regain his strength. And then Elijah goes to Horeb, to the mountain of God. And he's hiding in a cave. And in 1 Kings 19, 11 through 12, it says this, and just kind of hone in here. It says, the Lord said, go and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. And then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. After the fire came a gentle whisper, and that was God. Powerful demonstrations. Earth, wind, and fire. Wind, earthquakes. Just checking to see if you're still with me. Powerful demonstrations of God's power. A mighty wind, earthquakes, fire. God had all of these options, but he chooses to come to Elijah in a whisper. Why? It's just my thinking here. But one thing I know, you have to be in really close proximity to someone to speak to them in a whisper. And I think that's the point. See, when we're struggling, we wish God would show up in big and powerful and dramatic ways. But in my experience, it doesn't work that way a lot of times. I can very rarely hear God's voice until I silence my own. I think God, in the most personal way, is letting Elijah know that he is not alone, that God is with him, that he is intimately close enough to whisper in his ear. And then God and Elijah start to have a conversation. See, Paul says, pray about everything. And sometimes I think we forget that prayer is supposed to be a conversation. It's about our relationship with God and our desire, his desire to be with us. That creates our desire to be with him. And God reminds Elijah, he says, you're not alone, by the way. He says, I'm here, but also, there's 7,000 people that are still faithful, and I'm going to give you a helper. His name is Elisha, and you're going to mentor him because he's going to be your successor. It's important to remember that we're not alone, that God is with us, and that he gives us a family of believers to be a part of as well. Don't worry about anything. Pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank him for all he has done. Have you ever found yourself feeling overwhelmed by things going on in your life? And then you talk to somebody else and they start telling you about their stuff, and their stuff is like really a lot worse than your stuff. And all of a sudden you don't feel so bad about what you're going through. Has that ever happened? It happens to me a lot. It's called perspective, right? It's an important lesson. Robert Fulghum, in his book, Some Observations from Both Sides of the Refrigerator Door, great title, wrote the following about finding perspective. He says this: one of life's best coping mechanisms is to know the difference between an inconvenience and a problem. If you break your neck, if you have nothing to eat, if your house is on fire, then you got a problem. Everything else is an inconvenience. Life is inconvenient. Life is lumpy. But a lump in the oatmeal and a lump in the throat and a lump in the breast are not the same kind of lump. And one needs to learn the difference. Perspective. Don't worry about anything. Pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank him for what he has done. Gratitude has the power to change our perspective. When we acknowledge that everything we are, everything we have comes from God, it changes the way we look at life. There's an anonymous quote out there that says, the enemy of worry is gratitude. And I think Paul models that for us in Philippians in this letter. In the very beginning of the letter, we see his perspective on how he's looking at his circumstances in light of gratitude to God. And he says this in chapter 1, verse 12. He says, and I want you to know, my dear brothers and sisters, that everything that has happened to me here has helped to spread the good news. This is Paul writing from prison. And he's like so thankful because he's like, hey, you know what? All the palace guard, they're hearing about Christ because I'm here in prison. And guess what? All the believers, they've got more confidence now because they're seeing what's happening and how the gospel of Christ is being spread. And they're now talking out with confidence and boldly sharing God's message without fear. Isn't that great? Look how God is using my circumstances. Paul models this lifestyle, this prescription for how to deal with anxiety that life produces. He says, remember, the Lord is near. So don't get stuck in perpetual state of worry. Instead, go to God and tell him about your concerns. Recount all the ways that God has been faithful in the past, and be sure to thank him for all he has done. And then he says this, and then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. So the question for us, what is that peace?